Asian nations and so-called Latin American nations were becoming independent. Now, my central contention is this, and analysis is this, I'm contributing to the conversation here, is that the struggle of the 50s and 60s in the world has not been completed, and it's ongoing. And it actually hasn't been broken in its historical line of struggle. Now, we suffered a big world historic defeat in 1989 to 1991 with whatever the deficiencies were, and there were many deficiencies. The Socialist Eastern Bloc was the backbone of the Third World Liberation struggle. The weapons, the money, the exile, the education was all mostly facilitated by East German socialism, Czechoslovakia, Romania, and the Soviet Union. That's a historical fact. Whether you like these guys or not, I mean, it's not really relevant to that issue. They assisted everyone, the Indians, the Africans, and the Latin Americans. That backbone collapsed in 1989, 1991. That resulted in a crisis for the newly independent countries still operating under a global neo-colonial situation. So most famously, you probably know Cuba lost 90% of its trade, right, in 1991, and it went into the special period. Similar thing happened in socialist Korea, but the whole entire planet, including the people within the so-called West, suffered as well, because the welfare state was only a compromise given to the Western working class as a way to distract it from its growing interest or what was going on in the socialist countries, where they, by the 1920s, had equality, had a democratic rights, free education, housing, full employment, etc. When the British workers referred to Joseph Stalin as Uncle Joe, it was then that they needed to bring in what is now known in the English colonial left as the spirit of 45, i.e., let's extract and conduct greater genocide on the people of Africa and Asia, and by using a small amount of those super profits, invest it into their welfare state, so the great unwashed don't become loyal to the socialist countries, and they stay loyal to the West. And in doing so, they were greatly successful in that. So everyone has suffered. But what happened in the 1990s, and I'll finish off the last 30 seconds or so. The 1990s, remember the watchwords, the slogans of imperialism in the 1990s? It was structural adjustment program, New World Order, and the New World Order. That's what it was. It was the IMF and World Bank had complete monopolization of power economically against the Third World. By the end of the 1990s, things started to change strategically. And again, in terms of what we identify politically, the greatest example of that was the rise to the presidency in Venezuela of Hugo Chavez in 1999. That was compounded by the war of national resistance in Afghanistan and Iraq facing imperialist aggression and invasion. Afghanistan and Iraq enabled the rest of the entire planet to have a tiny bit of breathing space to move forward. And that's what happened. Latin America started to become radicalized with the support economically of China, which has basically bankrolled the Latin American project. Billions and billions, I mean dozens of billions of dollars has been pumped into Latin America in investment from China. And Russia has provided the military defense. We're just about to see a joint military exercise in the Caribbean waters between the Venezuelan government and the Russian government. At the same time that Americans are having their own military drill as well. So what I put it to now, because people always denounce African countries as being sellouts and compromised neo-colonialism, some of which that's true. But SWAPO are in power in Angola, ZANU-PF are in power in Zimbabwe, MPLA in Angola still, ANC in South Africa, FLN are still in power in Algeria. They haven't fundamentally changed. They had to adjust their circumstances to survive in the 1990s. Because there just was no alternative. There was no alternative global bloc to trade with, to protect us diplomatically. But now what we've seen with China and Russia using their veto, China using their veto against sanctions on Zimbabwe, China and Russia using their veto against the UN being used by the imperialists to conduct war on Syria. Yes, we screwed up on Libya collectively. That's a fact that we need to kind of reflect upon. So that's why I put to you that where Malcolm was talking about is still directly relevant to us today. And our freedom within the so-called West, and Ireland kind of plays, but like as you said, it overlaps the West and the non-West as well. But our liberation is tied, like it always has been tied, as Malcolm said, to the liberation of the global South. And we need to reconstruct those bridges again that were crumbled during the 1990s. There's lots of complexities and lots of contradictions in what I've just said, but that's the way I'd like to frame it and to kind of develop the conversation. I feel free to denounce it and cuss me down, etc., and disagree, because I'm sure people are saying, to a lot of things that I'm saying. So I'd like to open it up, and Dr. Sharf and Jerry, you're welcome to come to make a comment straight after me, but anyone else in the room as well. So please feel free to, let's have a discussion for the next 20 minutes or so and see if we can get Leila back and see what we can do. That's okay. Anyone want to step up and say something?
Oh.
You want to say something?
It's excellent, you said, because my talk was, that's the area was going on. As I mentioned, the Chicago, I want to go back again to the Chicago School of Economics with their philosophy of the brilliant Naomi Klein. She had a book called The Shock and Awe. She dealt with this issue in the doctrine of shock and awe. And the doctrine of shock and awe, we've seen it very vivid in 2003, militarily, I'm talking here, when they attacked Baghdad and they destroyed the backbone of the Arabs in Baghdad. Unbelievable amount of destruction and fire thrown at the Iraqis. And the last war in Gaza, as well, yesterday we were talking to my comrades, I was shocked myself to the savagery which is the Israelis thrown at civilians in Gaza. Okay, they have a resistant movement, but that resistant movement in Gaza cannot counter that militarism, which is the Americans were shifting ammunition from Germany, Obama's government shifting ammunition from Germany to the Israelis to stock them up, to keep destroying. And when the dust of war lifted in Gaza, we've seen the devastation in Gaza, another Nagasaki and Hiroshima committed in Gaza live on TV. The shock and awe, which is developed by the neoconservatives and neoliberals, it was the idea of it, as brother was saying, the economists of it. Get rid of the Keynesianism and the soft capitalism and appeasing the working class in case they want to turn toward the Redis or the Russians or the Soviet. Now, after we destroyed Iraq and after we did with the Chicago School of the Economy the coup in Indonesia and got rid of Sukarno and got Suharto and destroyed that large Islamic country, committed a bloodbath against the socialists and communists in there, destroyed them. And then we done a coup in Egypt and poisoned Jamal Abdel Nasser and got Anwar Sadat, the darling of Henry Kissinger, and we got that Arab country, the heart of the Arabic country, under empire control. We built siege or the Iron Curtain around the social states, and we get them closer and closer to the finish line. And in 1991, that happened, the finish line in there. And suddenly, we see the shock and awe, which was thrown at us militarily, we seen it economically there. Now in here, as we see the austerity measures, which is faced by most of the countries from Greece to the Portugal to Ireland, to all of that, that is the soft economical side of that new new cons and new liberals economical policies. As a brother was saying earlier on, we get you involved in a war like the French now in Libya, and we steal some of that wealth in Libya or Mali and that, and I can trickle some of it in your social welfare system and keep you appeased, at bay, and don't put your nose with the struggle of other people because I'm trying to feed you. This is the hypocrisy in the psyche of the people implanted by the governments and the political machines in West Europe today. So we should, if we accept that attitude, we should be feeling ashamed of ourselves of taking some of the African or Asian countries' wealth, and don't mind if it supply our own system. This is the point I wanted to make, is the School of Economics developed this model of economy, which we see Maggie Thatcher using it to destroy the miners, this Arthur Scargill at the time, and then the trade union movement in Ireland and in Britain. And then we see the face of it in economy, then we see the face of it militarily. It's not something. And by the way, it was, as Naomi Klein said, it was developed from psychiatrists, how they use electricity in shocking and destroying the memory of the patients. And when you are in Baghdad in 2003, if you are in Baghdad and you see that hill filling your sky, and you run even forgetting your own son or your own daughter behind you just to save your life, you will accept anything just to stay alive. This is the mentality of empire today. We are dealing with beasts. We are not dealing with politics or economics. We're dealing with beasts, and a beast, we know how to deal with beasts. Fight the beast. Thank you.
Anyone else? Jerry, feel free to come in. This is the first time ever I've heard people in West Belfast quiet.
I'd say something.
Yeah, please. Do you want to just take that?
Just for the crack, I'll say something controversial, just so that we move the discussion going. The kind of one thing I've seen about some of the analysis here globally is that it seems like it's a story of almost global political elites going around making pacts with each other. So, you know, this happens, which then gives Hugo Chavez a chance to get in, and then he makes a deal with China and gets this in, and then this happens, and it's all, we're talking about countries as if it's one specific social bloc, but in fact there's class struggles going on in all these countries all the time. There's different struggles between different peoples, and of course we can't predict that because the imperialism is distracted in this area, that therefore there was a bit of breathing space in this area, and that came to the fore, and then China's just helping out because China's sound, and you know, so I think it's a wee bit more complicated than that, and to be honest, I'm not so sure as how complicated it is in my own mind, and I haven't decided on anything in my own mind, but I would just be interested to see if anybody in the audience has any kind of ideas around that and where they've got to. So.
Thanks. Yeah. Anyone else want to come in? Or do you all love China? I just to provoke you. Can I come back on that? Yeah, I mean, obviously, you couldn't bring millions of people fighting the resistance from India, Ghana, and Egypt to Bandung at the conference. Obviously, people have to send representatives. But where you're right is that when we're in a decolonial struggle, it's a process of appreciating the devastating impact that colonialism has had on you as a people, which takes generations, actually. And the analysis takes generations to develop. Because what's happened with colonialism, like let me take the caste system in India, for example. The caste system is unjust, and I don't defend it in any way, shape, or form. However, before the Brits came to India, the caste system was more fluid. People could actually go up the ladder and go down the ladder. And in some cases, we had African princes, head of states in India, pre-British colonialism. The British, like everywhere else, they solidified the problematics that we had, and they internalized it. And then we internalize that, and we think that's what India was before the British. We think what the British have created to India is what India was before the British, but it's not. And even what was before the British in India was not fantastic. It was actually incomparably better than what the British brought to India, but it wasn't great. I mean, harems is not women's liberation, you know? You know, these things have to be deconstructed as well. So it's a complex process by which we win 2 steps forward and 1 step back. And when it comes to issues of philosophy and ethics and imprinting that upon global South relations, does China do things because it's a nice guy? Does China do things for Venezuela or anyone else because it's just sweet and ethical and nice? Yes and no. The two things come together. We've been united by the British. Everyone in this room has been united by the British. What the hell has Leila, a Palestinian, another Palestinian, an Indian, right, an Irish, got in common if it wasn't for the Brits? Nothing. You know, we would never have known each other if it wasn't for the British, you know, in the way that we have, and intimately as we do. We can blame the Brit. And, you know, when the Irish had their uprising in Easter 1916, they didn't do it for the Indians. But the indirect consequence of that is that the Indian nation rose up in celebration because you guys fought in 1916. And then Indians were, well, they literally, you know, extended a hand of friendship and unity to the Irish, and the Irish reciprocated that. Was it because we are somehow essentially beautiful, brotherly, sisterly people? Not really. It's because it was the necessity of the struggle. And through that we built up our ethics, you know, as well. Similarly, China wants to make business. But doing business with China as an African means that they're not going to impose a structural adjustment program on you. They're not going to threaten you with sanctions if you don't agree with them at the United Nations General Assembly, right, and their international policy. They'll leave you alone. But in addition to that, China does have an ethical approach. It's not perfect, but it does have an ancient ethical approach. You know, Zheng He was a Chinese Navy admiral sent by the Chinese monarchy to Africa many centuries ago. In a boat, by the way, that was 20 times bigger than that other genocidal maniac who was sent by Queen what's-her-name from Spain to the Americas.
Elizabeth.
Yeah, Elizabeth. With Leila?
Yeah.
Okay, let's try Leila. Let's try. But just the point is that China sent that boat, they did trade with the Africans, and they came home with a boat full of elephants and zebras and other stuff, and left Africa alone. Comrade Leila, are you with us?
Yes.
Okay, let's try again. I'm going to hand over to Dr. Shah, and he's going to just briefly introduce you and manage your conversation. Thank you.
I don't think Leila needs to be introduced. Everyone on this globe knows Leila. مرحبا بدر.
مرحبا أهلين.
وبنرحب فيكي هنا في بلفاست. And you're welcome to start talking to the guys before we lose the connection. تفضل.
مش عم بسمعكم بوضوح.
You can't hear us clearly.
Yes, yeah.
You talk to us, Leila. Go ahead.
هلا بقدر أحكي؟
تفضل.
Sisters and brothers, ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to address you via Skype, although I like it more to meet you in person. When the name Malcolm X is mentioned, it brings to our mind the call for civil rights. The call and the struggle for achieving those civil rights. In history, civil rights were violated so often by oppressors, be it a regime or occupants. The most hideous one is occupation, with all its forms, economical, cultural, or military. All forms are violation of human rights. Occupation is violation of people's right for freedom and dignity. It's another face of terrorism. It's terrorism by itself. Sisters and brothers, I as a Palestinian is still suffering of Israeli occupation like 8 million Palestinians. This occupation to my country, Palestine. Since 67 years, our homeland is occupied, and we were forced to leave our houses, villages, cities by force and by massacres launched by Zionist military groups That was in 1948. Since then, my people were dispersed, lived in camps up till now. We are prevented from the return to our homeland, although it is our right. And Israel was built on our land on the expense of the Palestinians. Moreover, Israel denies our right for return. Israel leads a policy of discrimination against us because Israel do not recognize our existence. In spite of the United Nations Resolution 194, which calls upon Israel to accept the return of the Palestinians who were forced to leave as a condition to be accepted a member in the United Nations. Yet Israel was accepted and we are still refugees, deprived from our right to be back to our homeland, Palestine. We call the 15th of May the Nakba, which means the catastrophe. Now Israel put people in jail if they commemorate the Nakba Day. Isn't this terrorism? Isn't this apartheid? Isn't this clear violation of human rights? Besides, Israel confiscates our land daily to build settlements and deprive the peasants from cultivating their land. Israel leads a policy of turning the lives of the Palestinians' head in an attempt to force those who remained in Palestine to leave voluntarily. Israel arrested 1 million of the Palestinians since 1967, when it occupied the West Bank and Gaza Strip. And now there are 7,000 prisoners in Israeli jails, including women and children. All calls and demands for the release of prisoners, especially women, children, and elderly, did not find any response from the Israeli side. There are now 26 deputies in Israeli jails, which means that there is no political immunity to parliamentarians. Israel built the apartheid wall on the Palestinian land, which was condemned by the International Court of Justice in The Hague, and considered it illegal, with the settlements as well. Yet Israel didn't abide by it because it considers itself above international law. Israel launched 3 wars against our people in Gaza Strip, which is put under embargo 8 years ago and up till now, causing thousands of casualties between wounded and martyrs. Israel demolished thousands of houses in the West Bank and Gaza and left the people homeless. You can imagine what kind of atrocities Israel inflicted our people. The question is, when will Israel be punished for all this? It's time for international community to punish the occupants for its war crimes. It's time to raise international voice against Israeli violations to oblige it to abide by international law. Sisters and brothers, I call upon you to join the BDS movement, boycott, divest, sanctions against Israel, to show your attitude against occupation, wars, violations of human rights. I, in the name of all Palestinians, ask you to extend your solidarity to our struggle for freedom and dignity. I call upon you to support our right for return and self-determination and independent Palestinian state with Jerusalem its capital. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Comrade Leila. Now I'll give the mic to the floor and see if there's anyone wants to raise any points or ask Leila anything. This would be great opportunities for you.
Thank you, Comrade Leila, for being with us this evening. I wanted to ask you to give your analysis as to the impact of the terrorism that is impacting especially Palestine's ally and neighbor in Syria, because there's a lot of confusion. This is a policy of the West trying to confuse us. First they supported the same rebels in the Arab Spring. Now they're saying the Arab Spring rebels are actually Daesh, so-called ISIS. How is this all impacting the prospects for Palestinian liberation?
Fadl.
Of course, when any changes in the surrounding countries surrounding Palestine is on stake, and those changes are not democratic ones. Those changes are done by others against what's going on in Syria and Iraq. You remember that the Americans once said that they want to build a new Middle East. A new Middle East with creative chaos, as Condoleezza Rice declared once. The Americans tried their military troops to invade Iraq, and they invaded it. But they found that there is a big resistance against, and they lost a lot of their men there. So now they want to change the means of destroying three countries with civilization: Iraq, Syria, and Egypt. Now, in Iraq, after invasion, we have witnessed how the Americans allowed some people whom they were hired by them to steal the museum, which means to have all what in that museum as a history of the country and to be dispersed. And they gained a lot of it by buying it, selling the things that were in that museum. Now, we see that, and also it was intended to destroy the armies. The first thing the Americans did in Iraq was to dissolve the Iraqi army, which was about 500,000. This escalated the resistance against the American troops in Iraq. They stayed there for 10 years, they left, but still they wanted to break another country and destroy its civilization and its strong army. That is not done by their hands, but they have another tools. I think that ISIS is an American Zionist industry. They have founded ISIS after the occupation of Iraq. The same thing that they have done with Al-Qaeda. They founded Al-Qaeda, supported it, trained them, and then now they are done with them. Now there is ISIS. ISIS is not only from the Arab countries or Muslim countries, it's also from other countries, and it is declared that there are Americans, there are French, there are European ones who came to Syria. It's to destroy the country, to destroy its army, and to destroy its civilization. What we are seeing now that this ISIS using religion as to hide behind the Islam, behind Islam as its religion. Why? I think there's no big difference between Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi and Netanyahu or Sharon or whoever from the Zionists also, because they use the same means, while it is also, it's the brutal way of killing. It's not fighting with the law of fighting, let me say it, but also they are using those brutal means, burning people like what they did for Mu'adh al-Kasasbi, the Jordanian pilot, and the Iraqi who were burned also in the cages, killing people by cutting their necks, like what happened in Iraq, Syria, and in Libya when they killed the Egyptian Copts. I think that it is the means and the tool, instead of bringing the troops, the American troops or the NATO troops to this area, because they learned the lesson that their troops will be faced by resistance of the people. But with these tools, they consider it as is a local one, while it's not local. All these kinds of weapons and arms that they are using doesn't show that it is people who got it from the armies of those countries or those bought it from the same country. They are supported by different countries, and I think on top of them the United States and the Israelis at the same time. We have seen that in Golan when Israel accepted to let the wounded to come to the hospitals, pretending that those are wounded, but some of them went to be trained and to be back to Syria to fight the army. Yet the Syrian army is still strong enough to face those barbarians of this century. For this reason, we don't say that these relate to Islam in any means. Islam doesn't call for killing people, doesn't call for burning people. It calls only for the benefit of the people when it is resistance and it is legal. Those people are to destroy not the country but also the societies. And up till now, ISIS is spreading, and it's spreading in Libya, spreading in other Arab countries. Some of them are called the sleeping cells. When time comes, they will continue their job. For this reason, we think that it's important to have a big unity among all these the people of those countries to face this kind of terrorism that we haven't seen it before. And it's the same, equal to occupation. It's the same.
Thank you for that. Any more questions? Yeah, complete.
Yeah, sure.
Just like to say I'm privileged to be in the company today the year comment speaking. Just want to ask a question about the BDS campaign and whether the people of Palestine can see a positive impact on that in terms of the BDS global campaign.
Comrade here, Leila, asking you about how the people of Palestine see the effect of the BDS campaign. Do they see positive impact of that in Palestine or not?
Sure. And let me say that the world experienced this at the time of apartheid in South Africa. And it helped the people and in South Africa in this struggle against apartheid regime. I think it's a peaceful means to people in different parts of the world to use it as a tool to express their attitude towards occupation by means against occupation, against war crimes, against apartheid, because I think Israel is an apartheid state also, and to support the struggle of Palestinians for their freedom. What this experience that succeeded in obliging or pressurizing the governments to isolate the apartheid regime in South Africa helped them to reach to achieve the goal of independence and end of the apartheid regime in South Africa. I think this experience can be repeated putting sanctions also on Israel. Now, America is using sanctions against any country who opposes its policies, but never, ever the United States took any attitude to punish Israel for its crimes. And now they are threatening us if we go to the ICC to punish them for their crimes against our people. Because building a wall is a war crime. Building settlements on our expense, it's a war crime also. Putting 1,800,000 people in a big jail called Gaza Strip, this is a war crime. All what Israel is doing in our country should be denied by international community. I think by joining BDS, it would help us to pressure governments of different countries. And now we're seeing some changes in Europe, that some parliaments recognized the Palestinian state, which meant that the parliament is the voice of the people. So we are waiting to go a further step, that governments take the same position of the parliament, so that Israel will be also isolated and we will be obliged to withdraw from our country.
Thank you. Just ICC stands for International Criminal Court.
Hiya. I just asked a quick question. When we were publicising this event and the speakers who were involved, the Leila Khaled that people know from in Belfast or in Ireland is a younger Leila Khaled who was in a different era, in another struggle, in an armed struggle against this Israeli state. Obviously, times have changed and politics have changed and strategies have changed. Do you feel that, first of all, maybe do you feel that the Palestinian strategy is changing, and what way should it change? And also, do you think generally there's a different strategy of the, whatever you want to call it, global south or colonized peoples against imperialism? Because in the maybe 60s and 70s, the strategy was very much based on armed struggle against imperialism. Today we have examples such as the BDS movement and different movements, but we also have inter-cooperation between different nations. Do you think that's part of a new strategy for decolonization?
No, I didn't hear well the question. Can somebody just repeat it for me?
Comrade Leila, the comrade was asking basically, people know you because of the famous image of you with the AK-47 of the 1960s armed struggle. Is that strategy still relevant today, or do we have new strategies such as BDS and also the cooperation from friendly countries of the Third World Global South? Right?
I think any revolution uses tactics in different stages. At the beginning, we used the tactics that the question was about at that time, and for a short of time. Then we have changed it. We didn't use it anymore because it achieved its goals. Now, the armed struggle after the breakup of the revolution tend to be an intifada, a popular intifada in 1987. Then it went to another intifada. Every time it depends upon the policies that the occupants use against us. So from Gaza there were no rockets to be used, but after putting Gaza under embargo, there was no other means except to use rockets. This is not the strategy, but these are tactics used according to the situation and the circumstances of the whole conflict. I think now there are other means, but when I say resistance, it doesn't mean only one phase of the resistance. It can include peaceful ones, non-violent ones, and violent also. It depends upon the circumstances. But in general, I believe in armed struggle as the mainstream. This is the mainstream. Sometimes we use it, sometimes we don't use it. But it depends, as I said, on the circumstances that is around us out in our country. While there are peaceful ones, non-violent, one of them is BDS. BDS is experienced, and it gave its it achieved its target. So to repeat it, it means that it is of use, of good use to us. Besides, Israel is supported by the Zionist movement, which is well organized all over the world and has influence on governments. So it's a time for people to use this means, this peaceful means, to pressure their governments to change their attitudes towards the conflict in Palestine. So whenever the international community punish the prosecutor, it means we are proceeding forward. But until now, Israel was not punished for all its crimes. And now it's time. After 67 years of occupation, I think it's time to punish the occupants for their violations and for their policy. I didn't get the other part of the question.
No, I think you covered the question well in your response. If I make the last, does anyone else want to direct a question to Comrade Leila? I think we'll take, yeah? Yeah, sure.
Just after the last attack on Gaza in 2014 in the summer, you can almost see that the internet and the awareness around the world was maximised. I felt, especially over the likes of social media, there was a lot more awareness around the city. Can that be seen in Palestine? Was there any sort of indication that there was more of an awareness around the attack on Gaza in 2014?
Did you catch that, Comrade Leila?
Please repeat the question.
I'm the translator here. Basically, the comrade was saying that during the last Israeli massacre in Gaza, we felt that the attention of people towards the plight of the Palestinian people in Gaza was increased. Did the people in Gaza and the Palestinians feel that themselves, that the attention was more than before, or they didn't particularly notice?
No, we have witnessed the big demonstrations in different capitals of the world, and it is important for us to feel when we are under raids and bombarding the houses and everything, the infrastructure, schools, hospitals. When we hear that there are thousands and hundreds of thousands are storming the streets in London, in New York, in Chicago, in Italy, in Spain, it gives us strength that we can be patient enough to face those atrocities, those actions done by Israel against us. We get power that we are not alone, that there are people who feel with us when Israel is attacking us. We have felt that it is more and more increasing, but the problem is that the governments are not doing what its duty towards. And they say yes, it's a crime, but at the same time they put us and the resistance and the Israeli excursion on the same level, which is not right. There is an occupant and there are people who are under occupation. So the governments should be very clear that we are not equal in this conflict, that the people should, by demonstrating and showing their solidarity to the Palestinians, they should also pressure their governments to take side of the Palestinians who are under fire. And we have seen that also with the many attempts to break the embargo against Gaza, yet it did not succeed all the time. But at least people felt that there are people in this world who are still supporting them, and they give them the power and the strength to continue their struggle for their freedom.
Thank you very much, Comrade Leila, for your contribution, valuable contribution as usual. And we'll hope we're going to organize in a couple of months another event, maybe here in Belfast. We'll have you as well to speak to the people of Belfast. شكرا ليلى، تحياتي لك يا بدر، ودائما يعني انت في القلب. Thank you.